All right, it's 9 a.m. Should we get started? Suppose. Can everybody hear me okay? Cool. All righty. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for making it out so early. I know I, for one, usually don't get into work quite this early, so it's great to be here at HTML5DevConf with all of you. My name is Schwartz, and I work at Say Media here in San Francisco, and I'm here to talk to you about well-designed development, Sass for engineers. And so I'm going to start off our talk today by explaining a little bit about my role at Say and what I do, a brief overview of how our code base works, and the structure of our team. And that all is going to lead into how writing good Sass is more than just throwing CSS at the bottom of the file and crossing your fingers that everything works, our systems that we implement for using Sass, and how writing good Sass is a slippery slope into learning how to become a good designer. So like I said, I work at Say Media here in town. We style multiple sites with one code base. So from a Sass perspective, this is a super interesting problem. We build a product called Tempest, which is a publishing platform, and also a CMS for digital magazines. Our partners that we work with are generally smaller tier publisher or medium tier publishers, places like The Guardian or Huffington Post, New York Times. It makes sense for them to have their own development team, their own custom product, but we work with people who are just slightly smaller than that, who are building a livelihood, who have big editorial teams, but don't necessarily have the time or the bandwidth to run an in-house development shop. So we build content-focused design for publishers. And this is pretty awesome because a lot of the sites we work with have amazing content, and so as a designer, it's a pleasure to work with them. So we work on sites like Exovane, Fashionista, Not Impossible Labs, biography.com, ReadWrite. This is one of my favorite articles on ReadWrite about how to build your own random non sequitur Twitter bot. It's a very important thing for everybody to know how to do. Anyway, so we're always pushing continuous improvement for this point of view publishing platform. And so that means that we are constantly pushing code to the code base. Whenever we roll out a new feature or bug fix or whatever it happens to be that day, it goes out to all sites at once. So it's a great deal for these sites. So I work on a team of about 40 people. And it's split up between engineering, designing, and product. About 34 or 5 of those people are engineers. So that tells you that our design team is actually quite small, much smaller than our engineering team. I'm kind of curious today who's here. How many people consider yourselves a designer? Just a few. How many consider yourselves an engineer? Cool. All right. Does anybody work on a team where the balance is quite different than mine? Does anybody have a team where it's like half and half or more designers than engineers? What's your ratio look like? Oh, okay. So yeah, that works. Well, that's cool. I'm jealous. So when you have such an unbalanced team, you kind of, and this is quite typical, I think, in most companies, you end up, your designers, we're kind of working on multiple projects at one time, where engineers are kind of working on project by project. They get to really dive in deep, and we're kind of overseeing the entirety of all of the sites and all of the designs. So where this starts to become a little bit of a problem is as we start to scale and grow our partner sites. And so now we have many, many sites that we're looking at every day. We can't physically go through and check the visual regression that's happening on every site. I have a lot of wires here today, and I can't stand still, so I have to make sure I don't fall down. So as we're building and adding features and adding all these new things, we're working on building some visual regression automated testing, but as anybody who's worked with that knows, it's not quite robust enough. It's not quite there. You still need some human interaction and human testing. And so what that means for me is I need my engineering team to be as vigilant and knowledgeable about our design principles as our design team. And so the way we build our sites, Sass is very important to us in our daily development. Because the way we get different designs on all of these sites is that each site has their own file of custom Sass variables and assets. And so these are everything from custom fonts to like logos and SVGs, images, border radiuses. We can set all kinds of different variables for all of the different sites. And so with the one Sass code base, we run all of the different variables through there. And that makes the different design for all the sites, which is pretty cool. We do all of this using libsass. And the funny thing was, so I was giving a talk a couple weeks ago about our code base and talking about using libsass. And those of you that have used it know that it is so much faster than Ruby Sass. Like, the compile times are amazing. And somebody asked, well, what's it like to work in libsass every day? And my answer was, well, it's like writing Sass 3 years ago. But the good news is, I was just at SassConf a couple weeks ago in New York, and we just found out that merged into master, I think 2.5 weeks ago, was support for extends and maps. So libsass is now becoming very robust. The maintainers of Sass are very committed to making libsass a much more robust and catching it up and catching up the documentation so that we know what we can use and what we can't use with libsass. So this is really awesome news. Lots of cool things coming down the line with libsass. And I mentioned this before, but writing good Sass is more than just adding a bunch of CSS at the bottom of the file. I don't know how many times I've seen engineers just do that to make it work. It's a lot of copy and paste jobs, just a lot of, we just have to get the CSS in there. I don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about it. I don't really care how it looks. I don't really care if it's messy. I just want to make it work. Because this is what engineers think about when they think about CSS. A lot of people just, not that engineers don't care or understand, it's just that you might have bigger problems on your plate. And so, like, spending time deep diving into CSS isn't something that you really have a lot of bandwidth for. And so a lot of times it just becomes this like push and pull to like get the feature out the door, but we also want to have really clean and dry Sass at the same time. And so I've set up what I'm trying to make a very simple, straightforward roadmap so that everybody can feel empowered to write great Sass every day. And so we start this by starting with naming conventions. And here's how we do ours. I think it probably like everybody does these slightly differently. We use kind of a mix of OOCSS and SMAX and a bunch of different conventions. So we start out with layout names, and those are what I like to call small and mighty. They're small because it's not generally a lot of CSS, but it's mighty because they're reused all over the place. And these are layouts that only define structural presentation of the container. So something like L-full-width is any object that is going to be full width on the page. And so as you can imagine, this is used all over the place. And then we get into module names. These are slightly more specific. These represent the core functionality of each page. So for instance, m-story, as a digital publishing company, you can imagine we have a lot of articles that we style, and so we use this all the time. Module components are sub-elements of these modules. So for instance, m-story copy, m-story author, any like sub-element of the main module. And then we have this category called submodules. And this is, I'm still trying to figure out if this is the right way to go for us. To be honest with you, I'm really thinking about removing this because I think it doesn't get used a lot, and when it does get used, it's maybe used a little bit improperly. But we're keeping it for now, and these are variants of a module that are different enough to require their own submodule. So like mfollow_Twitter, _Facebook, whatever that would be. And then we get into module modifiers, and these will generally live on the same line in the same part of the HTML as the module. And so these, like, for instance, has SVG. Any unit that has an SVG will get this class, and that will help the SVG render properly across different sizes. And then we get into state names, and these are states that are modified with JavaScript. So is disabled, is active, things of that nature. And so that's just a brief overview of how we do our class naming. And then we get into the order of properties. And this is something I'm becoming quite a stickler about because I think it's really important to be very vigilant about this stuff. It really helps us write better Sass. Includes come first. When I made this slide, we didn't yet have extends, and so we'll have to find a place for those. Maybe they'll come at the bottom, maybe we'll switch them and they'll come at the top. But then I definitely want to alphabetize all of our properties. And this sounds a little uptight. However, I think it's quite important for a number of reasons. Number one, I think it's nice when we're refactoring, when we're going in and modifying Sass, if we're going to, say, just change a color or a width, we know where to find that in the stream of things. Number two, and perhaps more importantly, I think it's really important. We do a lot of designing in the browser. And even if you're working from a mock, I think it's really helpful. You know, you're kind of throwing a lot of CSS at the wall to see what sticks. And so it's really great at the end of the day when you're done writing that CSS to go through and alphabetize because you've probably repeated yourself. I know I do this all the time. Like I'll go through and I'll see display none, display block, display inline block. And of course, the inline block is the only one that's actually working. So my CSS or my browser, everything looks fine. But then I go back and look and I have all this extra stuff in my CSS. So it's good to go back and clean it up. I like to, again, use lots of variables. This is, helps keep one source of truth. It also helps when we're updating designs or if somebody doesn't quite like something. If we're, again, designing in the browser, we can nudge things, make things bigger and smaller really quickly and easily because we've repeated ourselves a lot with these variables. And then I like to do inline media queries as opposed to separating them out into a different file or at the bottom of the file. That way it keeps everything in line. You know where this, list item, how it responds throughout the media queries all in one place. You don't have to hunt around for it. I'm also a stickler about whitespace. I think a lot of you will agree with me on that. Whitespace is very important to keep everything neat and tidy. And clear, concise comments. I think because we can do non-compiled comments in our Sass, I definitely encourage developers to write as many comments as they see fit. I would much rather see a little bit of a verbose comment than have no idea why you were writing the thing you were writing, and then we have to have a conversation about it. If you leave a comment, then I know exactly what it's there for. Also, I think we should leave comments whenever you're overwriting anything, whether you're overwriting a mix-in or overwriting some old styles. I think it's good to leave a note about that because it gives us a sense of when and if we need to refactor, if this mix-in is out of date, whatever it is. So here's an example of some bad Sass. The white space is all over the place. You can see the properties for the parent container aren't even listed together. That margin top should be above the width. Things are not in alphabetical order. That is driving me crazy. And then there's so many bang importance that it's giving my spidey senses a little weirdness because I'm like, oh no, like what's going on? Why are we overwriting everything with a bang important? That seems odd to me. We need to start refactoring. And on that note, I think it's always important to refactor as we go. If you're building a new feature, if you're just going in and changing the background color of something, every time you touch a little bit of CSS, I definitely want everybody to make sure, just alphabetize that little block of code or make sure the white space is all lined up. Just whatever little, like following the campsite rule, like leaving it better than it was when you found it is always a good practice. And another thing, especially when you start to talk about the more advanced features of Sass, when you're using maps, when you're using like if-else or running strings through things, definitely check your CSS output because Sass is very powerful. You can do lots of crazy, cool, awesome programming in Sass. However, at the end of the day, the most important thing is that we have clean, dry CSS. So Sassmeister is a great app where you can write your HTML, write your CSS, or I'm sorry, write your Sass, and then it shows you the output of the actual CSS that you're going to see. And this is a really quick and easy way to do this outside of your project. You don't have to like dig through your entire CSS file to see the compiled CSS, which is quite nice. But the reason why I'm here to talk to you guys today is because I believe Sass is a slippery slope. And I think it's definitely been a slippery slope for us designers. When we started writing Sass all those years ago, you start just by nesting, and then you add variables, and then all of a sudden hey, we're actually like writing, we're doing programming, which is pretty cool. And so I think everybody agrees, and I've seen lots of talks and lots of blog posts, designers need to code. Designers need to learn to code. And I think we are. I, for one, work in code pretty much 100% of my day when I'm not in a meeting. So I think that has really taken off and is really awesome. But what I am very passionate about is I think engineers need to be more thoughtful and more cognizant about the design. And I think Sass is a slippery slope because it gets us thinking about that. It gets us thinking, as you're writing Sass, you can't write Sass without looking at the browser and looking at the design. So how do we think about design more and be better designers? At Say Media, I've started running with a coworker of mine a series of design and CSS workshops. And these are exclusively catered to engineers, and this is to get everybody thinking about the design and understanding our design principles a little bit better. So one of our first workshops we talked about whitespace. And so if you look at, so we did a little brief lecture at the beginning talking about whitespace. We took this ad, some random ad we found on a website, and just cleaned up the whitespace a little bit. And it shows you what a big impact it can have. If everything's the same size, if there's borders around everything, it's a cluttery mess. You don't really even see the important information. So by cleaning up our whitespace, we gain a lot. We also talked about grids and repetition and padding and margins and how that can really make a website look so much better when things are all the same. And so we showed these two examples. One, sorry if anybody here designed this Yahoo one, but where the paddings and margins are kind of all over the place. There's no like set grid structure. And then on one of our sites, how we really tried to implement like repetition in margins and padding so that it gives the user just a little bit more clear breathing room. And so after our lecture, then we actually had like a little arts and crafts project where we cut up a bunch of magazines and had the engineers lay them out if they were to design that page. And this was a really interesting opportunity to see how they think about design, how much they listen to what we had to say. And actually, some of them did such a great job that I felt like their layouts were better than the original magazine layout. So it was cool to see people really kind of latching on to these ideas. And I think something that we learned from this that was really cool is like design is not so scary. I think sometimes as designers, we talk about design in very flowery and art school ways that might come off as intimidating or confusing. But I think if you talk about design as math and grids and systems, it becomes very clear to engineers. This is what you guys do every day. And so if we can talk about design as math, I mean, it's a win-win, and it makes it very simple and easy for people to recognize. And after we did this workshop, our bug reports of broken whitespace went way up because people were really paying attention and realizing when something went wrong. And that was the exact outcome that we really hoped to have because we can't be, our eyes can't be on every site all the time, so we need to multiply our powers in this sense. Another experiment that we've tried is the design and engineering Jamboree. And I don't know why, but for some reason I feel like the word Jamboree needs to be in all caps all the time, so I just write it that way because it makes Jamboree. And this is like, just going back to like engineering principles, this is a pairing session. And so we sit for 1 or 2 hours a week with an engineer and go through like a very small chainable changes that we can make to our design to make it better. And this has been pretty great as well because not only are we communicating more, we're sitting down with each other, they're understanding our goals a little bit better, we're understanding how difficult some of these what we think are small changes actually are. And so we learn a lot about each other's processes during this time. And so we talk a lot about pairing with somebody who does the same work as you, but I think pairing with somebody who does very different work than you is also really important. And we learn a lot about the work that each other does. And so all of this, I say all of this to say that good Sass cannot exist separately from good design. When you're writing Sass, you're writing for the browser, and you have to be looking back and forth between your code, between writing good semantic dry code, and then also creating a beautiful design in the browser that's not broken, that doesn't have white space all over the place, that isn't like falling out of the box model. So we want to make sure that Sass and the browser coexist really nicely. And so this is the slippery slope. If you start caring about the Sass that you write and writing good Sass, you will start caring about the design of your websites. I have a longer form article if you're interested at that URL, and I'm also on Twitter. It's Ms. Schwartz. If you ever have any questions or just want to chat, I would love to talk with you more. And I'll be hanging out here for a few minutes if you have questions. So thanks.